Hi, folks. We are doing another debate here. I'm have on the line Maarten, who is from South Africa, and we are going to be discussing a topic of his choice. We tried this a couple of weeks ago and managed to crash and burn on that because the file corrupted or something went wrong with it, and we lost 2.5 hours or almost 3 hours of debate. So hopefully this time it will work. Anyway, Maarten, go ahead and introduce yourself, and we'll go ahead and start.
My name is Maarten. English is not my first language, so bear with me. I'm an industrial engineer. We work a lot with machines and factories, and we optimize them, and we also work with simulations to see where we can reduce waste. And I hope the listeners will enjoy the debate and find it interesting.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so the topic that we had discussed before, and we're going to repeat some of the stuff that we did then so that, that information gets out. The main topic here that Maarten wanted to discuss was, well, go ahead. You go ahead and bring it up yourself.
Yeah, it was, we discussed the main topic was the evidence for intelligent creator. But we can also go over a few things that we also discussed, which went a little bit off the topic, but
sure.
It was also really interesting.
Sure.
Okay, so I just want to say before the debate, because I like debates, because I always learn from it, and I want to make 100% sure that I'm not deceived in some places, because I think we're all deceived and have been deceived in some places. So I want to know from you, Derek, how sure you're not that you're not deceived about God?
That I'm not deceived about God?
Yeah.
Well, to be deceived
Could you be deceived?
To be deceived about him, there would have to be some intent to deceive me, right? Unless you're talking about self-deception. I don't know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, self-deception, or deceived by someone else, or deceived by your own mind. Or just wrong information about them? Is there a chance?
Oh, wrong information? Sure, that's a possibility. Yeah, that's always a possibility that one is self-deceived, or that one has wrong information. Sure.
Okay, cool. Okay, so we have debated in the past a lot. I think I wouldn't be surprised if we debated for 1,000 hours already, but
by text, we've done so by text and comments on videos. Yeah.
Yeah, and emails. Also emails. We did a lot of emails.
That too.
But anyway.
So why don't you go ahead and present your argument, basically, which is basically an argument from design, right?
Yes. Okay, but I just want to have a background so we can have a nice base, understand, and cover also some of the stuff we discussed in the previous debate, because that was really interesting.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so through all the debates, I've seen that one of the big problems that is perhaps keeping you away from the truth is that every person has biases, but if you have huge biases and use silly skepticism, you can reject any evidence. So I've seen you use that, but if your biases are large enough, silly skepticism, you use silly skepticism, then no amount of evidence will convince you, because you will always just make an excuse for evidence. And like you agreed, a person can always just make an excuse for evidence, but it does not remove the fact that it's still evidence. For example, in a court case, if someone provides evidence, the opposing side does not just accept the evidence, they always make excuses for it. You agree with that?
No, not necessarily. I mean, if you have sufficient evidence, if you have an argument that is extraordinary, you're going to require extraordinary evidence to support it. Sometimes that's not easy to find, and if you
give
can't
me an
find
example of extraordinary evidence. Give me an example. What would be extraordinary evidence?
Well, if someone said,
I don't know what's extraordinary evidence.
An example: if someone said aliens just invaded Washington, D.C. and destroyed it, nuked it flat, and there's flying saucers flying all around there. If someone told me that, I would say, prove it. Give me evidence for that, because that would be an extraordinary claim. A more mundane claim would be if someone says, hey, I've got $5 in my pocket. Okay, I'll accept that. I mean, it's contingent on them actually being able to produce those $5 for me to be certain that they do have that money, but I can accept it because that's not an exceptional claim. That's something anyone could have, not a big deal. So that would be
okay. So a creator is an exceptional claim.
Yes, yeah, Definitely.
But we see creators all around us creating things, so I think it's totally natural. But anyway, okay, so in the previous debate, that was
Natural,
also really
not
interesting.
supernatural.
Huh?
Natural.
What?
You said it's totally natural. That I would agree
Yeah,
with,
for-
yes, but
Yeah.
what we don't see is supernatural creation.
But
So
okay, we'll get to that. But okay,
Okay.
in the previous debate, that was really interesting was that you said you hate Christians and God, and I wanted to know why you hate them so much. Like,
no, I don't hate Christians and I don't hate God. I don't know where you got that exactly, because I could say that I hate a lot of the ideas that Christianity produces, yeah, and I would say I'd hate the way that the Bible describes God, but I don't believe God exists, so for me to hate God would be a little bit weird. I know there
okay,
are...
but if you realize he exists, then you would hate him, or what? Because in the previous debate, you said you would hate him.
I would if he... yeah, okay. I can think of a scenario that would. If it turns out that suddenly he appeared in front of me and provided sufficient evidence for me to be convinced that he exists, let's just say he does that, then my first question would be, how do you justify all the things you've done? How do you justify allowing 30,000 children to die in agony of disease and starvation every single day? How can you justify drowning the entire world in a flood? How can you justify ordering people to be raped and things like that?
Yeah. Okay. So you, yeah, that's all I wanted to like. You said in the previous debate you would hate him. So
and if he did have good reasons for that, I might change my mind. But if he didn't, then I would say, yeah, I pretty well hate him.
Okay. But you also said you hate Christians. But
some I definitely do.
Some.
Many I don't. In fact, most I don't, because most are not adamant. But the sort that are willing to compromise science, who are willing to compromise societal values and morality for what their Bible says, or any scripture, frankly, those I have a hard time liking, let's say. And some of them, yeah, I definitely do hate.
How much?
Well, enough for me to make a lot of videos, because I think they're damaging to society, the ones that
What about Muslims? Do you also hate them or not?
Muslims, to the same degree. Actually, I find Christians and Muslims to be very similar, but in general, I would find Islam a little more threatening by some of its teachings, what it says about infidels and the like. But they both have a lot of the same ideas.
Why don't you make videos against Islam then? Or
well,
isn't it a little bit biased to only make Christian videos?
Yes, it is somewhat biased to make videos against Christianity. And the reason for it is as follows. One, there are fewer Muslims in the U.S., where I live, than there are atheists. There's something like, 3% or less, maybe 1% of the population is Muslim. And they don't have an influence over society in the U.S. So they're not really a particular threat by comparison to Christianity, which is something like over 80% of the U.S. population is Christian, or around there.
So Christianity is a threat.
Well, yeah. And second thing is, I don't know enough about the Quran to speak on it. I've read the Bible multiple times, so I feel more comfortable with that. I've read countless articles on the Bible, but the Quran, I really don't have enough information there yet. I do plan to down the road, but not yet. I don't have enough information to justify making videos concerning it.
Okay, but what threat does Christianity pose? Like,
what threat does it pose?
Threat.
Well, science is the number one there. Back in the 1970s is when I was first exposed to what I would call toxic Christianity, which is creationism, for example. The creationists were attacking evolution way back then, And I didn't have enough information to know exactly. I figured something was wrong with the way they were describing the logic, but I couldn't quite get it. So that actually spurred me to get my degree in evolutionary science and to become a guide in the Galapagos Islands. I studied at the Charles Darwin Research Station in the Galapagos, and I've studied various aspects of evolution throughout my entire life. And because of the natural connection between creationism and Christianity, I've also studied the Bible.
Okay, but so Christianity is a threat to evolution or what, to science? Because I thought science is about, like, they like challenges to the theory, and they would gladly accept challenges.
Yeah,
and not
sure.
see it as a threat.
But the challenges have to be in the proper arena. If you've got evidence for, if you have evidence, for example, against or for a different theory, let's say, than evolution, then present that evidence in the scientific arena. But that's not what creationists do. They lost in the courts, and they lost in the scientific arena. And because they lost in the scientific arena, they've taken it to the people, essentially. They argue in churches. In fact, one of my videos that I just released a few months ago, I went to a church where they were attacking evolution to their parishioners. Is that the right word? Their congregation. And they presented, or the pastor presented, erroneous and fallacious information about Christianity, about evolution, and I went there specifically so I could defend what.
Yeah, I know about
defend that information, right? So anyway, that sort of information is getting spread to the people who are lay people. They're not the experts who understand the science themselves, so they just accept it, and that's a kind of insidious way to try to attack science at the layperson level. It's I consider that very disturbing.
Yeah, but they also try through scientific means, but they don't get like a level playing field. But anyway.
Why don't they?
Okay, so.
Why do you say that?
No, they don't get like a level playing field. They just throw, like, they just say that it's not science instead of like going for the arguments against it or so.
But every one of the arguments has been addressed whenever they've presented their information, and what they've presented is almost nil, because if you look at how many articles are published on a weekly basis in evolutionary theory, 1 week's worth overwhelms what has been published by the entire creationist or intelligent design movement over the past several decades. So the best they do is they attack evolution rather than supporting creation, because attacking evolution, even if they could completely wipe out evolutionary theory, they could prove it wrong, it would do nothing to prove creationism. Creationism has to stand on its own. It has to stand on the evidence, and it doesn't.
And even if evolution is right, you said before that even a creator can use evolution, so it doesn't prove that there's no creator.
That's correct, and there's no one who actually studies evolution who says that evolutionary theory disproves God, or they shouldn't, because it just doesn't. Evolutionary theory covers only the diversity of species that have occurred since life appeared for the first time. You could have life first appear by aliens or by a god, first seeding the planet, and then evolution would be true from that point forward. All the evidence would still fit it. Yeah.
And that Dover trial you talked about, where they won, most of the people in that trial were all Christians. Even the best argument against irreducible complexity was brought forth by a Christian. So it was like, and the judge was also a Christian. So everyone there was Christians. But anyway, okay, so I want to say, if atheist scientists were not biased, they would like be ecstatic to find evidence for a creator. because discovering the creator
Whatever
is probably
evidence,
one
it
of
doesn't matter whether it's it doesn't matter whether it's evidence for a creator or not. Any evidence that
for a creator, they would be ecstatic, but
one way
if
or
they
another,
weren't biased.
But
Okay,
what? I'm sorry.
Sorry?
No, I'm asking you to repeat that. I didn't hear you. I'm sorry.
Okay. If atheistic scientists were not biased, they would be ecstatic to find evidence for a creator, because discovering the creator would probably be one of the biggest scientific discoveries ever.
Oh, yeah.
Wouldn't you agree with that?
I would agree. Absolutely.
Okay, so then you would be ecstatic to find evidence for a creator.
Well, I wouldn't say ecstatic. I mean, that's not the response that you would get. You would be excited, definitely. Excited would be a better word, but ecstatic implies that you're thrilled, like happy, and that's not necessarily
Okay, so excited.
the response.
So you would be
excited makes sense, yeah. Oh, definitely. That would be one of the biggest discoveries you could imagine, sure.
Yeah, I think the greatest mistake you can make in life is to think there's no creator when there actually is one. But anyway, let's get to the evidence for creator. Okay,
you can't just say that there is one. You got to actually provide evidence for that claim.
I know. I'm just saying, if there is a creator, then the greatest mistake you can make in life, one of the greatest, is to think there isn't one and then live like there isn't one. Understand? It changes everything in life if there is a creator or not.
Yeah, but it doesn't change how you should behave. For example, let's say there is a God that created everything, but we have no evidence for that. Even if there is a God, we shouldn't behave as if there is. We should behave by what the evidence reveals. And if the evidence shows if there is no evidence to support the God hypothesis, then it doesn't make sense to live by the God hypothesis.
I'm just saying, if there is actually a God and you think there isn't, and then it can have bad consequences. But anyway, let's get to the evidence.
Sure.
I just want to say first, I see this as level one. Like, level one is figuring out if there's a creator or not, and then level two is figuring out what he is like, which is theories are built on the level one, like all the religious theories and which one is valid. They battle it out. So studying the world and science is like studying God's fingerprints. That's how I see it. And there's a lot of evidence for a creator. This debate is just going to cover a start of all the evidence. Okay, so scientists have relatively recently found that life has a programming code. They called it the DNA code, and they cracked some of the code. Not all of it yet, but we can read and write it now. And DNA has information-bearing properties, and it takes about 3 gigabits of DNA programming code to build your body. And scientists discovered nanomachines and factories in the cell that the DNA code carries out those commands. So the machines actually read the DNA code and carry out the commands. And the DNA code also has many of the same design strategies we find in computers. For example, it has automatic error correction, it has files within folder, it has data encryption and decryption. All of these things point to intelligence, because we have only seen intelligence making these things. Okay, so there's layer upon layer of design in DNA. And even Bill Gates said, like, DNA is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software ever created.
Like a computer program, that's the key word, like. It is analogous to it. He's not saying it is.
Okay, and Richard Dawkins also said, the machine code of the genes is uncannily computer-like. Apart from the differences in jargon, the pages of a molecular biology journal might be interchanged with those of a computer engineering journal. So it's like really the same qualities.
Well, okay, but let me use my argument that I used before for you here. What you're essentially saying is that we see something in nature that we also see created by humans, by a human intelligence, because DNA resembles computer code, and because we humans create computer code requiring an intelligence, therefore the natural phenomenon, in this case DNA, is evidence for a creator. Basically, that's what you're saying, correct? Well,
yes.
My response to that, though, is that the lightning example. We see lightning occur in nature, and we also see humans creating electricity through various devices. We are able to generate electricity, and therefore, because humans use their intelligence to create electricity, then in theory, lightning should also be created by a creator.
Okay.
But the thing is, even and this is even more apt an analogy because electricity is the same material as lightning. So whereas computer code and DNA are made from quite different materials.
Yeah, it's like alien technology.
You can look at it that way. But what I'm saying is that
the same as our,
what I'm saying is that
code.
lightning and electricity are much more closely related than DNA and computer code. So so my analogy there of lightning and electricity is even more close than your example that you've given. And yet we know that electricity has we have no evidence of any supernatural component. We know all the various factors that go into generating electricity purely naturally. So what makes you think that DNA requires a creator when lightning evidently doesn't require a creator?
But even if lightning, say we use your example, if there is a creator, then you can even trace lightning back to a creator. You understand?
That's a different story.
If there is a creator.
You're going to a different story, though. I'm talking about lightning itself doesn't appear. I mean, it's not like it's something that's been sitting around waiting for thousands or millions or whatever years until it's unleashed. Electricity is generated in the atmosphere, and that's unlike DNA, which is something that we know has been around for a much, much longer period of time, and it continues to evolve over time.
But so DNA is so much like a programming language that we can even store our own programming code on DNA, and scientists have successfully done this.
And we've actually powered devices with lightning. So
but it's,
I mean, that's just harnessing what nature can do to act like a machine for something we want done. Both are examples of that. That's not unusual.
Okay, so it doesn't matter how many design strategies we find in DNA, it would still be it's still not evidence for intelligence. It doesn't matter how good of a machines we find in cells. It doesn't matter.
If we found some evidence that it required a creator, like for computers, for example, with computer code, we recognize that that has to run on computers that we know how to build. We actually build. They didn't exist until we built them. Software has to be programmed in. We use people to do that. So we know the origin of both computers and the software that runs on them. DNA, however, if you were going to look at that, you say, okay, let's go ahead and take it back in time. What did that look like originally? Is there any part of that step where you have to introduce a supernatural element, a creator, let's say? You have to introduce a creator because it couldn't occur on its own. But if you take DNA back to its origins, the origin of life, now granted, we can't yet create life from scratch, but if you take it further back to the very basic elements of a primordial Earth, basically the prebiotic Earth, it was hot. There was some basic chemistry going on there, lightning, heat, radiation, etc. If you take that environment with those basic chemicals and just let it stew for a while, you end up with more complex chemistry. It automatically, on its own, spontaneously, generates into more complex molecules. And those molecules...
Sounds like do you know the spontaneous generation theory?
Yes, I do. But this is not spontaneous generation because this
is just... It sounds like spontaneous generation.
Well, but it's not. I mean, you can do that yourself with a
Why doesn't it happen all the time then?
It does. If you combine oxygen and hydrogen, you're going to get water.
Okay.
So it's just basic chemistry. If you just do basic chemistry from those elements from way back when on the prebiotic Earth, you end up with complex molecules. Those complex molecules will automatically, through radiation, heat, cold, etc., will spontaneously, again,
spontaneous
form.
Generation.
Well, it's not spontaneous generation though, because that was the creation of whole creatures out of something like mice being
Yeah.
turned out, created out of wheat, which
Was proven wrong, yes.
yeah, but this is just simple chemistry, and if you have those complex molecules become nucleotides very easily, and ribonucleotides can form, if introduced to certain clays, dripped on certain clays, you'll automatically get RNA, and RNA can carry information and can evolve on its own. In fact, the earliest forms of life are thought to have been RNA-based viruses, and we still have some that exist today. So, and going from RNA to DNA, we haven't actually managed to do that step yet, but to get up to RNA completely through natural means is a pretty serious set of steps, and it's more of a step to get to that point than I would say to get from RNA to DNA, even though we don't have those steps yet. And once you've got DNA, you've got yourself, you've got all the explanation for all life without having resorted to a creator in any step.
Okay, but a creator could easily overcome those steps, much easier than...
It could, but why would you have evidence that the very simplest chemistry in a primordial universe can result in almost all the steps for life? Why would you have that if life is something that a creator created? In other words, if God can create life, he could create it right now, boom, a full planet full of life, essentially. We wouldn't see any evidence, or there would be no reason to see any evidence beyond the earliest life forms that indicate chemistry can lead to life.
Okay, but you just said now that a creator could still use this production, means of production.
Sure.
So
why not?
Okay, but if we were in a computer program and we didn't know it, I think you would probably say the same thing. You would say the CPU is doing all the work. It's totally natural. We can explain how the electricity flows naturally through it and how the programs improve themselves automatically, and new code is being generated in the computer automatically through the CPU. So it would fail in both cases. And even if we in a simulation,
okay. If we're in a simulation, that doesn't mean that that would mean that everything is artificial, but that everything has been programmed essentially to look like it's completely natural. That we can there is that all life and every feature that we witness is it may be computer generated, but it looks like it is natural. We can't tell the difference.
Okay, but have you seen the nanomachines that copy the DNA in cells? Like, have you seen those machines? It's really awesome.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah. The little. You mean the animated examples of RNA and DNA in action?
I'll post the.
I think I know what you're referring to. Yeah, I've seen those examples, and they look like machines. Sure.
There's like a nanomachine that splits the DNA, and other machines that copy the DNA, and there's like a nanomachine that runs down the DNA, double checks it.
Right.
And so I want to know, how was this made by an evolutionary process? Because evolution can only work after something like this is made. It starts copying DNA. So.
Right, but
So how do you get nanomachines without evolution?
You already can get to most of the steps for the very first cells, simplest forms of life, through completely natural means. So although we still don't have that next step, let's say, from RNA to DNA, and then the letting life go run amok on its own, there's no reason to think that it couldn't be done completely naturally. There's no because of all this. Let's see if I can think of a good analogy on this. If you see a car drive out of a factory, and you go into the factory and you can see the car being assembled in many steps, but there's one room you can't go into, and it's the part where, I don't know, the chassis is attached to the body. You can still see the part that's going on beforehand, the initial assembly, and you can see the later, more complete assembly, there's no reason to assume that there's some special magical or supernatural event going on in the part that you don't see, because you can assume that it is a continual process from the simplest parts of the construction to the finished product.
Yeah, and but cars also like evolve. It becomes better and better. But yeah, anyway. Okay, so you said that creator is supernatural, but I don't understand why atheists say like a creator is supernatural, because intelligent creator is totally natural. We see it every day. And what is supernatural is programming code just coming into existence without any initial input from intelligence.
Yeah,
and
but
we
I
have never
just
seen this
pointed
happen.
out
So my question is...
I just pointed out that you do see almost all the steps already figured out. We are missing only a few steps. They're important steps, but we have most of that process from us to, from the simplest chemistry to us figured out. We have most of those steps there, and none of it requires
okay, so why
any sort
can't
of
we
creator.
do it then?
Well,
why can't we do it then? Well,
you could, 2,000 years ago, you could have asked, why can't we fly? You know, we hadn't developed the technology yet. And today we are well on our way to understanding abiogenesis, but we haven't, I mean, it's not a complete, completed science. We haven't actually developed the technology to do the entire process yet. I mean,
but shouldn't it be easy? Shouldn't it be easy if the world can do it? And
well,
why isn't
if you
it
consider
everywhere? Like the whole universe would be populated if this was so happening.
It's not that it's necessarily easy, because we don't know that those missing steps. We don't know how difficult they are. But when you have it obviously, if the age of the universe being 13.8 billion years old, Earth forming 4.6 billion years ago, and life itself not appearing for several 100 million years later, hundreds of millions of years with constant molecular action going on, that's not a fast process. Once the first life appeared, it was very simple, a single-celled blue-green algae that survived for hundreds of millions of more years, a billion years perhaps. Let's see, actually, I'm not exactly sure the exact number, but most of the time that life has been alive, it's been extremely simple, and it wasn't until the development of eukaryotes and that the Cambrian explosion was possible, and there we saw life evolve at a much more rapid pace. But before that, it's an extremely slow process. Not much occurred.
So, what's your point?
Well, my point is that it's not something that we can just do, throw together and have it done. It took a long time for it to happen. So, to expect it to be easy to do in a laboratory is not exactly reasonable.
It sounds like a smokescreen of like millions of years, and then something happened, but we don't know exactly what. But we have theories. It's like making a theory.
But they're not making it up.
They're
not making it up. We have evidence for when, for example, enough oxygen first developed for to indicate that bacteria was producing enough oxygen to influence the atmosphere. We see that in the formation of rust. Before that, you don't see that oxidation. You only see it at the point that a specific point in the fossil record. If you do multiple tests on the strata, the geological strata, all the way down, you have consistent and increasing ages all the way down to the oldest rocks being over 4.5 billion years old. It's not like people are just making up these numbers. They actually are provided by a variety of different forms of evidence.
But they could be wrong.
Sure, we could all live in a simulation. It's possible we live in a simulation and that all of this is programmed in. There's no way to know that, and until we have evidence that we are in a simulation, we act as if we don't.
Okay, I remember that you said like you debated theists for like 20 years, and after debating theists for like 20 years, you haven't seen any evidence, and that just shocked me. So because
Yeah,
then you have
seriously.
to have some other definition of evidence. So what's your definition of evidence?
The best way to word it, I guess, would be that when you come up with an idea that makes certain predictions, and you go out and find those predictions or test those predictions, the results of those predictions, if they support your idea, then you have that would be evidence. If you
So that's the only way to have evidence.
Well, actual evidence that can be demonstrated and repeated by others. I mean, it has to be repeatable, because otherwise anyone could make a claim saying, okay, well, we were created by the flying spaghetti monster. If they don't have to produce any evidence that others can test and verify for themselves, then anybody could make up anything. So it has to be reproducible, and it has to be testable, and it also has to be enough of a challenge that it doesn't, that if the testing of that idea fails, then the theory or the idea itself should fail. If you make claims that are not testable, and that any predictions you make wouldn't destroy or severely modify that idea, then it's not a robust test. That's why evolution has been so successful, evolutionary theory has been so successful, and creationism has not.
Okay, but so you only see that as evidence, but in court cases they use a lot of different evidence, and you reject those kinds of evidence.
Court evidence is not anywhere near as rigorous as scientific evidence. In court,
Okay,
they'll actually use...
Even in
if
science,
someone
they
says,
use
"Hey,
some
I
of the
saw,"
stuff in court.
in court, if you had 10 people say they saw someone stab someone to death, then that would be sufficient. That would be evidence that they would include in court. But if you
And
had
the same in science.
no, you don't have
Same in
that.
science. They actually do it. They give out questionnaires, and then they get that data, and then they make predictions and stuff and theories on that evidence.
They only can do that in circumstances where, like social sciences, where there's no way of actually getting any better data. If we could get into their minds and actually know what people are thinking, we would use that. But when we have nothing else, then they use then they have to use what the people actually say. Like, for example, how do you feel about when you see this picture? And the person gives a self-report. Well, if that's all you've got, that's what you use. But people can lie. We know that people can lie. They can misinterpret. They can hallucinate. There are a number of reasons why people will give false answers when they're giving it voluntarily. So it's much better to avoid it if at all possible. That's why the hard sciences like biology and chemistry, physics, and all that look at the social sciences with usually with a little less respect, because they are a little more wishy-washy in their pursuit of information. They can't actually validate their information anywhere near as well as the harder sciences can.
And even scientific papers, that's a form of testifying what happened in the scientific...
Sure, you can look at it that way, but a scientific paper, everything you say has to be backed up and verified, and you provide the tests that you've done to prove that, and those tests are tests that other scientists can actually read over, understand, and do themselves to verify that you got those results. So it's not just a testimony that counts. Now, in the lay people, we kind of people who don't have the scientific background to actually do the tests themselves, or even to understand the papers. If you read scientific papers, most lay people can't even figure out what they're saying because they are quite complex. So we have to have it interpreted in some way, and that's where science writers come in. That's where people like me come in to help make it easier to understand the science.
Okay.
And,
but
and
so,
there you are dealing with a kind of testimony in a sense, but I can provide the sources for where I got the information, and those sources need to work their way all the way up to the original papers, the original studies done by the scientists.
okay, so you have like another definition of evidence, because let me just read you what the definition is on the internet. It's the available body of facts or information indicating whether a belief or position is true or valid.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you have like video, you can have video evidence, you can have DNA evidence, you can have testimonial evidence.
Yes.
You can have
Now,
documented
the problem
evidence,
comes when you say
facts evidence.
now those all of those can be true evidence. Yes. However,
Okay.
how do you know if they're true? That's the problem, because if evidence can be faked, or it's a one-time event, that's very difficult to validate. So
Sounds like your spontaneous generation at the beginning of time. It's very hard to
no,
validate.
we actually
This
can test
happened
that.
one time.
We can test that. If you take the actual conditions that we think that the Earth had to have been going through during its early formation, all you have to do is combine those elements in a flask, essentially, and subject it to the forces of radiation, electricity, etc., that would be present then, and automatically the basic elements, amino acids and the basic building blocks of life will form. And this is true whether you vary use the original experiment or vary it to different other possible scenarios for the initial conditions. You almost always get the same basic chemistry, that is the organic chemistry that becomes the beginning of life. It's the basis of all life that comes afterward.
Okay, but so can programming code and machines and factories be evidence for intelligence
They
and design
can.
strategies?
If you have evidence of how those were created by intelligent forms, for example, the factories that we
you don't
use.
know how it was created. You just find this like somewhere else in the galaxy, and you see it has the same characteristics as our programming code and the same characteristics as our machines and factories.
Well, it
Could you then
depends.
say that
If
perhaps
they're
evidence?
if you just see let's say the machines, and you don't see the creators, so let's say there are species that died out, then you would have to verify that didn't occur naturally. Now, what if you found that the factories are created out of crystals and they have some weird chemistry going on that's creating, producing some devices that run out over the world and consume other minerals and turn themselves and also construct additional copies of themselves and so on? We might not be able to tell whether they are natural life or whether they are machines that were created by some other civilization. That may be tough to tell. In fact, there's plenty of science fiction stories where you can't determine whether other people don't know whether they're referring to alien species or alien machines. That's a good question that could actually occur. But if we see alien creatures creating devices, and those devices are going off and doing their thing, then we can say, oh yeah, those things were created. We've seen the evidence of them being created. So it's not quite the same thing. What was that?
What's the evidence that they were created?
We're seeing them be created by an alien
other
species.
machines.
No, by an alien species, not by other machines. That's not necessarily it, because we have certain signatures of what we recognize as our technology, our machines, but that may not be the case with alien technology. We may not be able to recognize it as created or not. So the only way you can say whether or not some device has been created is if there's a precedence for it, something that we know can actually create that through technology, for example, like we use.
So it's not. So you say it's not reasonable to like see everywhere we find these things. It has a creator, and then to see something that has the same characteristics somewhere else, and then also say perhaps it could be evidence for a creator.
You can say perhaps, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
So you would say then, you would agree that perhaps it could be evidence for a creator.
It could be, but there's no unless you've actually got some evidence for that, you're going to it's just speculation.
Okay, so like I'm open to like the evidence for evolutionary theory, because like you said, a creator can use the evolution, and thus I see it like as a bad excuse against the creator. But I think this
it's not an excuse against the creator. It basically makes the idea of a creator unfalsifiable, but it also makes it immune to evidence. For example, if there's a God that created the universe, knowing that and he also created the chemistry that would eventually lead to life evolving on its own and becoming species that spread out and diversify and end up becoming us. In fact, that's what old Earth creationists believe. I'd say most Christians are old Earth creationists. They accept the evolutionary science, but they believe that God started it all and to varying degrees guided life, created perhaps that first spark of life, and then guided evolution to become modern humans. Now that doesn't make means the Bible can't be interpreted literally, or the Quran or any other religious text that you use, but that way there's no conflict between science and religion.
Okay, so but if you realize that the evolutionary theory is false, then you wouldn't realize that there is a creator.
No, it's not an either or. That's a false dichotomy.
Because I've seen some scientists that if they realize that the evolution theory is false, the only theory left is like there must be a creator. So even if it's false, then you would still not be a theist. You will still be an atheist.
Yes, because I need evidence for something. It's not evidence against one. If they found that evolution was completely false, that everything that we thought, all the bones, the fossil evidence that we've got, all the genetic evidence that we've got, has all turned out to be planted or something like that, then
you would still be an atheist.
Well, yeah, because an atheist, the atheist position is, I don't believe there's a God, and I don't have any. The reason for that belief or lack of belief is a lack of evidence of any God. So we'd have to go back to the drawing board, basically. If you want to have, if you want to convert someone like me, an atheist, to a theist, at least, not specifically necessarily a Christian, but just a theist in general, you're still going to have to provide evidence for a creator of some sort.
And, give me an example. What would count as evidence for a creator?
Well, let's say our universe is created as a computer construct that someone has a computer programmer in some society has created this entire universe. So there could be some bits of evidence like magnification to an extremely low level. You could see a certain graininess that would be indicative of a virtual universe, that we're living in a virtual universe. But I would say an even better one would be for the creator to suddenly appear and say, I've created you as a computer program, and what sort of information would you want to know to accept that this is the truth? Perhaps showing them they could reprogram things to make this universe do things that would be impossible by physics as we understand it.
Okay, so if Jesus appears right in front of you and says he's the creator, that wouldn't convince you?
Well, have you ever heard of people pretending to be someone they're not? You know?
Okay, but
So what do you mean
if
by
you
appeared? If
realize-
somebody walks up on the street, I mean, I've had people walk
No,
up on
no,
the
no.
street and
No,
tell
no,
me they were
I'm
Jesus.
talking about.
But
No, I'm talking about appearing right in front of you out
Okay.
of nothing.
So that's what it-
because
that's what I
last time
said.
you said it wouldn't convince you.
That
But-
alone
so
wouldn't,
Now
no,
you make
because-
it sound like if a God comes to you, then you would actually convince you.
there would need to be something extraordinary because, I mean, you've seen stage magicians like David Copperfield make the Statue of Liberty disappear, right? Or a plane or a car. And it looks like, wow, that's magic. How could that possibly have happened? It must be magic. No, we know that it's not. We know that they are just using clever trickery to do that, which means it's possible that someone could do the same thing to try and convince me that Jesus exists. So I would need something more than just appearing in front of me. In fact, we've got a number of researchers are working on invisibility cloaks right now. And they actually are quite impressive, the results they have so far, where if you hold it up, you actually see what's behind the person through cameras that are projecting the image on the front. So you don't see the person
So you
until
would
it drops
explain
away.
it away.
No, I wouldn't explain it away. I would say that there's a possibility that there's a natural explanation. In fact, there's what's more likely that some technology is being used. Technology, we know technology exists, and we know that it's advancing, and we know that there are some things that can look pretty miraculous. Is it more likely that, or is it more likely that for the first time I'm actually seeing evidence of something supernatural? Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and simply Jesus appearing in front of me is going to take a little bit more than that. But I'll grant you that's a good start.
Okay. Evolutionists say like the DNA code of chimps is like 99% the same as ours. But that's
Close.
actually not correct. Like they excluded like a whopping 1.3 billion letters of the DNA code. They ignored about like 18% of their genome and 25% of ours. But I'll send you a video.
I don't think so. It's 98% of the actual DNA is the same. It's roughly 98%, I think.
But it actually isn't. I'll send you a video explaining it, and it's not a theistic source. It's a scientific source
Okay.
that explains it. So there's actually a huge amount of extra programming. It's just not just some changing a few letters and then you get a chimp or a human.
But as I pointed out before, that itself is, at most you would find, oh, okay, there's some greater variation there. But if you look at the same, if you compare apples to apples, oranges to oranges, we have 98 to 99% of our DNA shared with chimpanzees. It's slightly less with gorillas, and as it drops down through, the more distant the species, the more distant, more different the DNA, down to we share something like 7% of our DNA with bacteria, something along those lines. I've got the numbers if you care to see what they are.
But you can send it.
But that is exactly what you would expect if evolution is true. You wouldn't
Or a
expect there
common
to
creator.
No, a common
A
creator.
common creator would actually copy code. I did a
Why
lot
would
of
he copy
programming.
code?
And I copy code for new programs, so you would actually see the same
This
way
is a-
of programming.
Well, okay, then you're not talking about an all-powerful God, because an all-powerful God wouldn't have any need for copying code. But okay,
Why not?
if you're going to use, well, why would he? I mean, you could have every single creation be a completely different aspect. There needs to be nothing that's in common. Whereas evolutionary theory requires that everything have their genetic structure, not even before even understanding of genetics, the underlying architecture of every species would have to be related in some sort of a tree. And in fact, that's what we see. Now, you don't have to have that for the God hypothesis to be true. God could create every single species as having its
Yeah,
own
it could.
special architecture.
It's not.
But-
You can. Normal designers, like even in computer programs, if you see two programs that were made by the same guy, that you would copy and have the same style and copy a lot of the
and
code.
the reason
over.
yes, I agree. And the reason that they do that is because they're not all powerful. It's more efficient. It's easier for them to
Okay,
copy
but then
and
the
paste
creator
code. But
perhaps
wait
is
a
not
sec.
very
If
powerful.
using your logic though, you'll notice that the eye, the ability to see, has numerous different, has evolved in numerous different ways throughout the animal kingdom. The vertebrate eye is different from the mollusk eye, which is different from the insect eye, and so on, flatworm eye, etc. So do different eyes indicate different gods? I mean, if you're saying same codes or similar codes indicates a creator, then wouldn't multiple versions of code indicate multiple creators?
No, because you can build different kinds of eyes, but there's a base code that you would copy over for, not just every time make another way. You understand? There would be a base code that you copy over and not just program from the start again.
Yeah, but that's
so
again, why would a code?
It could be evidence that it's the same creator, not. You understand?
Well, no, I don't, because if it's the same creator, then you would have all eyes would be the same. Why not use the same eye for all species of the same basic structure? And
that's
instead,
like saying, why are all programs not the same from a same creator? You can make different programs.
But you just said that if they've got they'll reuse a program will use the same code over and over again.
Yeah, you will copy some code over if he wants to make another.
Once you've got sight, once you've got sight, why would you create a completely different type of sight, rather when the whole purpose is just to give sight to another species? Why not just use the same code? What I'm just saying here is that I'm not trying to say
because
that
there's different,
it's impossible.
there's
I'm just
different environments. Like in the sea, it's different from ours, so it needs another eye.
That's not true, because you've got vertebrates that are living in the ocean, such as whales and porpoises, dolphins, etc., that have the same kind of eye we do. They've got the same vertebrate eye.
It's still different. There's I can show you the difference between the eyes.
There are differences, but your argument was that underwater you can't use a vertebrate eye. You need a different kind of eye, and a mollusk eye is one that you would use. I mean, if you're saying that's the one that would be more efficient underwater, then why would you have a vertebrate eye for whales? That's the thing. You never see species with something you never see a chimera type species where you have a whale with a mollusk's eye, because a mollusk's eye is more efficient for underwater. Let's say it's not, but let's say it were. Let's say it was. If that were the case, then why would a creator put a vertebrate eye in a whale? It would make more sense to put in the mollusk eye, but that's something that is a limitation for evolution, because evolution can only work with what it has. It can't borrow something from somebody else. There are certain cases under bacteria and plants where there's some leeway there. But in vertebrates, that's just not a possibility, not in any advanced animals. And as a consequence, that is evidence for evolutionary theory, not for a creator.
Okay, have you heard of the mantis shrimp?
Yeah.
Okay, it has been there for a really long time, and it has already had complex eyes from the very beginning. And it's more complex almost than all our eyes. It can see more colors, and it has a lot of eyes. And it's different from ours.
There's a lot of eyes that are superior to ours, yes.
You won't expect such complexity at the beginning with animals.
Well, that doesn't mean that that simpler eyes didn't exist beforehand. In fact, they did. Eyes by themselves don't preserve very well. Sometimes insects' eyes can, but eyes themselves are just soft matter, and they will degrade pretty quickly once the individual dies. So you're going to have something to indicate that eyes exist, eye orbits from bone, for example. And so creatures that existed before the development of bone and other hard parts are not going to show, you're not going to see the development, the evolution of the eye until suddenly it's fairly full-fledged, because that's when bones become available, and now you can see the eye orbits, which weren't visible before.
Okay, and you said you would realize there's a big problem with evolution if they like find out that their assumptions were wrong, and it's like not millions and millions of years, but say 1 million years. And you
Yes,
say
that would be a big problem for evolution, correct.
That would be a really big problem.
Yes.
Okay, but so if we find like artifacts of humans or something in layers that are like prehistoric or so, then it would also have a big knock on evolution, or?
Yes, if assuming it's undisturbed, it wouldn't count, of course, if someone digs into Precambrian rock and drops a cell phone in there and covers it up. That wouldn't.
Yeah.
It has to be.
If there's technology, then it would like a hammer that I talked about previous debate, and footprints, say, of humans in really old rock.
Yes,
stuff like that.
Although if you're talking about the Paluxy tracks, for example, those have been debunked because the tracks that they're referring to are dinosaur tracks, not human tracks.
Okay, I'll send you a video that lists a lot of such discoveries that they made, stuff that contradicts the well-known.
Are you talking about the hammers that get covered with various secretions?
No. There's a hammer in a stone, and they dated the hammer to be like super old. The hammer is so old that it changed into coal. The handle, the tip of the handle changed into coal.
That I would have to see. Yes.
And the hammer has qualities that we can't make or haven't made. It has it consists of different materials.
I haven't heard of that, although I have heard of a few examples of people who've tried to pass off mineral-encrusted hammers and other tools as ancient fossils that are buried in the rocks, when in reality they weren't. So I'm dubious.
I'll send it in the comments,
yeah.
and then you can tell me
that would be
what you say about it.
That would be fun.
Okay, so science is about like making observations and doing tests and building theories that can make like predictions, like you said. And we can make predictions based on the intelligent creating model. For example, if scientists say like the universe is eternal, then we can predict that they are wrong, and thus the universe should have a beginning if there is a creator. And if scientists claim there is a lot of junk DNA, then we can predict that it actually is not junk. They would later find out that it's not junk.
Well, no,
that's what happens.
Scientists can be wrong about something, but it doesn't mean that the opposite, the creation story, is automatically true. Again, you have to provide the evidence that supports the actual creation claim. For example, like the soft tissue, that one's a classic example. People found soft tissue in dinosaur bones.
They didn't want to accept.
Yeah, and the thought was the creationists hopped on that, saying, "Oh, that creation said, or scientists have never said that the soft tissue couldn't survive." Well, evolution doesn't depend on whether or not the scientists got it correct of whether any soft tissue can survive for millions of years. It's possible to make that assumption and just simply get it wrong.
The creation model, like the creation theory, can make predictions. And so if the scientists say the universe is eternal, then we can say from our theory, no, it has to have a beginning.
But
and our theory can make predictions, even though scientists would say the opposite at the beginning.
There wasn't enough information at the time. The scientists who made observations believed in the steady state theory. That was the most common theory, that the universe was this eternal. Yes. Yeah. Every religion pretty much has a beginning of the universe as well.
Yeah, because every religion is built on the theory that there must be a creator. They just have think differently of him. The theories are that how the creator is, what the creator is like, they battle each other out. That like different religions and so, but they're all built on a theory that there must be a creator. So this
almost
theory
all,
can
not all, but yeah, pretty much.
So
all the big
this theory
ones,
can make predictions. That's what I'm saying. It's
but it's not a prediction. I mean, it's saying okay, there's the beginning of the universe, but there's no. How is that a prediction of the religion? Because you can't test it. How do you test it? What was that?
You said theories make predictions. Okay.
Yes, but it has to be a prediction that would disprove the claim. So
and it did.
Well, no, because let's say the steady state theory actually turned out to be true.
Then it would be a big
Okay.
knock on.
No, it wouldn't be. Not at all,
theory.
because
would.
all religion would have to say is that everything came into being in an instant, in that state, because
things that don't have a beginning don't need a creator. Things that are eternal don't need
No,
creator.
but you don't understand what I'm saying. It's that it's even if you assume a creator, even if you assume a beginning of the universe, it doesn't mean that the universe has to expand from a tiny, infinitely hot point, which is what physics has determined so far. There's no details in almost any religion of how the universe appeared and developed.
It doesn't matter.
It could suddenly appear. If the steady state, for example, the steady state didn't contradict any existing religion, because they would still believe, let's say, even young Earth creationists believe that the Earth was created, let's say, 6,000 years ago. Even if the steady state universe were found to be true, it would not disprove the claim that that alone would not disprove the claim that the universe was created in its steady state form 6,000 years ago. I'm not sure I'm describing that.
So you say a universe that has always existed
No, that appears like it's always existed.
Okay, so
Yeah.
let's say it has always existed, then it doesn't need a creator.
Right, but what I'm saying
Yes.
is that you don't...
But you're saying its appearance of... because I would love to have seen that argument being used at the atheist, who always use the argument that the universe is eternal and doesn't need a creator. And you would come and say, no, it just appears like it could just be that
Well,
it
it could be.
appears.
I accept the possibility that we live in a simulation, that none of this is real. I mean, it's a possibility. We don't know.
I don't think that's a good excuse, but anyway.
That's why the most important thing that I think the biggest difference between what you accept and what I accept is that I understand that information can be wrong, that claims can be wrong,
I agree with you.
And for that reason, belief in something can only be justified by sufficient evidence. And
But you believe in a lot of stuff without evidence.
no, that's not true. Name one thing that I believe in that without evidence.
Okay, you believe that you exist, and you're not in a simulation. Do you have evidence for that you're not in a simulation?
I didn't say that I'm not. I don't believe I'm. In fact, I just said a moment ago that it's a possibility we live in a simulation. For all I know, I don't believe that we live in a simulation, but I'm not saying that that I believe that I live in the real world. There's a difference between saying you believe in something and you don't believe in something.
Even science presupposes a lot of things that can't even be proven by science. There's assumptions that can't be proven by some.
There are some, but when you have a predominance,
and you believe in those stuff. You believe in evolution. You believe there's probably no creator. You believe.
See, it's in the wording that you're doing. I believe that the best evidence we have so far indicates that evolutionary theory is accurate. But
it could be wrong.
Yeah, it could be wrong. But that's where belief, the way you're using, the way I'm using, is different. I don't. We use belief in a very shortened form, because that long explanation that I just gave is not something you want to give every time you want to say you believe something. But for example, I believe that I will have lunch in another hour or so, because I've had many experiences of lunch in another hour or so from now in the past. So that's evidence. I have evidence that my friends actually are good friends because they've done good things for me, and I've done good things for them. It follows the pattern of friends. But the belief is not. It's not a blind belief that I'm accepting.
I'm also not having a blind belief in creator. There's a lot of evidence for him.
But you haven't presented any. The best evidence you've provided.
You have just a while back said that it could be evidence that there is intelligence by the programming code we find in DNA. We
It
find
could
in
be,
machines
for
and
all I
factories
know,
in
but we
DNA.
don't know.
So, then it's perfectly reasonable to say that there could be a creator.
But you believe that.
It's,
There's a difference.
yes, I believe that there could be a creator.
Oh, no.
I
But
believe
now you've changed the tune a little bit. You're saying you believe there is a creator, is what you said before. Not that there could be, but that there is.
I could be wrong. There's like 0.0001% that I could be wrong. But the probability is like so little that I could be wrong.
How
no
can you
great.
even possibly
even
make a probability? What is the probability that you're right?
Even Elon Musk said there's only one chance in 3 billion that we're not in a simulation. Only one chance in 3 billion. Even if you just do math.
Are you going to use an argument from authority? What does Elon Musk have to do with any of that? I mean, what kind of authority does he have?
He's an intelligent person. And,
there's a lot of intelligent people who say stupid things. I can say stupid things that he's said.
So you wouldn't agree with him? You wouldn't agree that there's a high chance that we could be in a simulation. We see simulations all around in this universe. And so to say that
I agree that there's a possibility. I agree that there's a possibility, but to put an actual number on it, an actual statistic, is ridiculous because we have.
No, but it's just like approximate. It's just like saying.
You can't even say that. We have a data point of 1. Our universe is 1 data point. We have nothing else to compare it to, and so to say that there's only a 1 in 3 billion chance of
our universe.
What?
There's a lot of created universes that we make in our universes.
Yeah, we create simulated universes. That's the basis of that argument. But to actually state that there's only a 1 in so many billion chance.
It's like the flat Earth argument. We see all the planets are round, and then suddenly we're special. We're not round. It's the same. We see everything as a simulation and as a creator. And now to say, we are so special, we don't have a creator, everything just happened on its own. Just like in a computer, everything just happened on its own, and then we try to make a theory that we just remove the last little bit that the creator did in a computer. We say, no, the materials formed in Earth naturally. We can explain exactly how the computer materials formed in Earth, and then we just need to put it together, then we have a successful theory of how everything just happened.
If we have the actual, if we had examples of in nature where our actual factories that we create vehicles in, we found that there were ways that various minerals and other naturalistic forces interacted that could actually create those factories, then we would have to doubt that there is any need for those factories to have been created by an intelligence. If we can see that,
you can make the same theory up for if we were in a computer. The atheist would make the same mistake by making a theory.
What's the mistake? Where's the mistake? Go ahead.
They would believe in that this computer was created on its own. We can explain exactly everything in a computer, how it works, everything. And everything works on its own. There's no need for a creator. And then just taking it another step and saying the initial process where the creator actually had to put an input, then you just give a theory that, no, we don't need their creator as well.
Okay.
Because we can already explain everything.
Let's put this in perspective then. Do you believe that we are in a computer simulation? Do you believe the possibility?
I don't know. It could be.
Okay. So
I don't know.
If there
but that would make sense.
Okay, let's say it turns out that some computer programmer in the outer universe just used the technology of his or her time, or his or her world, to create our universe. Then would it make sense for us to currently behave as if that universe, our universe, was created from another universe by a computer programmer?
But it would make sense that if we are a simulation, it would make sense how God is outside of our time, because a simulation you can change the time easily.
You don't even need the God in this one, because a computer simulation is something that is something that can be done completely naturally. We already create our own virtual worlds that are populated by virtual AIs. They're not sentient AIs yet, but the idea is that given enough time, we will have that capability. So, that's a possibility. But should we just suddenly assume that we're just a computer program and behave as if we're in a computer program?
It would be funny if we take your reasoning and put it into a guy in the simulation, and then he would tell the other programs, no, you are not made by a programmer. It just happened on its own. Everything we can explain in a computer naturally.
Well, if we can explain, if we have only evidence that's natural for all of our existence, all the way back.
Inside.
What was that? Oh, yeah, if it works naturally, sure. It's possible that we're being fooled. It's possible we're being fooled and that we think we're in the real world, and when in reality we're in a virtual world. That's a possibility for all I know. But we don't behave that as if it is the case. We don't alter our behavior as if that is the case. We don't try and hack the matrix because we assume that we're...
We already hacked our hard drives on our bodies and changing the code.
Yeah, but that's nothing like changing the matrix. That's changing material that's already in this universe. That's a different story entirely.
We're already hijacking nanomachines also.
Yeah, but that's working with the materials we have within this universe. We're not trying to actually alter the physics of the programming of the universe itself. We're just working with whatever is available in this universe, and that's fine. However, we have to work with the evidence that we have, the actual physical, demonstrable evidence that we have, not make assumptions like that there's a computer programmer who created a world. That's a possibility for all we know, but until there's some actual hard evidence for that, there's no reason to believe that. Same thing with a God. Until there's actual concrete, solid, extraordinary evidence.
Okay, what would be extraordinary evidence? Because I still don't know exactly what you would totally accept as extraordinary evidence and that would convince you 100%. Like, you would become a theist today if that happened.
Well, I gave you an example in a previous discussion, which is one example that would be a really good start.
It's like 100%, then you would believe.
100%. I don't know if I'd ever 100% believe in anything, but I could be extremely. I would consider it extremely good evidence for it if every single cell, every molecule, let's say, we zoom in close enough and we can see made by Yahweh in. And a specific year, a date. Yeah, then I would say, you know what? Well, would I become a Christian? I don't know, because then we would go to the stage 2 thing where do we consider him someone worth following, or is he an evil monster? But that would be extremely good evidence, I would say, for me at least, that... So
that would convince you, because it wouldn't fully convince me that I see the evidence for intelligence much more...
Well,
no.
That's much better evidence than anything else. And
because we can do it also.
No, I'm talking about every single atom, everywhere, no matter what you check, or not atom, but every molecule of any sort. Let's say just limit it to living cells. Take every single living cell, and you see written in there, property of Yahweh or something like that. If that were the case, no matter where you look, you see that you find that signature essentially. That would be extremely difficult to explain in any other way. Now, there are other explanations, because it could be that we live in a simulation and the guy who created our simulation is just screwing with us and made us see every cell we look at, just made us see that. That has to be considered as a possibility. So you can never be 100% convinced.
But then it would still be a creator, then. You understand?
That would be, but it would be a completely natural creator, not a supernatural one. There would be nothing exceptional about that. And there's an alternative that even...
What's the difference between a supernatural creator and a natural? Because
we can even avoid that whole situation just by having an alien species that's so advanced that is mind-controlling us and making us see those signatures on every cell that we look at. I mean, it's possible
It's
to
like
come
we
up
would
with a...
explain away like that.
No, of course not. That's, I mean, that would be ridiculous. To both
Okay, but that is an excuse someone can make, or what?
That's not an excuse, but that would be a one reason why you can never be 100% convinced that anything
Of
is true.
anything.
Anything. 100% convinced is...
I watched the debate of three atheists a few days ago. Cosmic Skeptic, it's on his channel. And I watched, they couldn't even agree that a cup exists on the table. So no wonder they can't agree that if there's a creator or not. They can't even agree that a cup on the table exists.
Well, what color is God's eyes?
Well, we don't know.
Yeah, you don't know. People argue back and forth. How many angels can dance on the head of a pin? There's lots of unknowns that people can do, and it depends on how you're going to define something. When we say a cup, okay, there are certain standards that we'll accept. For the sake of living, we have to assume that the world around us is real. Otherwise, you walk in front of a truck, you're going to, and you don't expect to get splatted, you're probably going to be dropping out of the gene pool really quick. But if you're talking in absolute terms, is that cup real? You can't state that because it is possible that it's a simulation. That is a possibility. We don't know, and as a consequence, saying 100% something is foolish.
Are you a nihilist or not?
In what way?
A nihilist, you know what that means?
Yeah, someone who doesn't believe that anything exists. But if that's one of the definitions. I mean, what are you defining as a nihilist?
Yeah, a person who believes that life is meaningless and rejects all religions and all principles. And there's also...
No, I don't think life is meaningless. We make up our own meanings, our own purpose. I don't think anyone can impose meaning or purpose on us. So.
And you believe there's a real good and evil?
No, good and evil is the label we attach to certain behaviors. I don't think there's anything called good that is a force or evil that is a force.
Then why do you say God is evil if there is no good and evil really?
Because it's a label that we apply to behaviors, and God commits those behaviors that we define as evil. And
okay, but it's your opinion.
It's more than an opinion. It's something pretty much every society comes to the conclusion of. For example, murder,
in a game,
rape, slavery,
there's no creator.
Torture.
In a game. Yeah, but see, in a game, if there's no creator and we're playing in the game, you can make up any rule. There is no rules. There is no good and evil. You can do what you want. But if there's laws, actually, like say, you can't kill another person in the game, and if you do, then the creator of the game kicks you out. Then that becomes, you understand?
Yeah, so, but that's an arbitrary rule that has no. It's not morality or anything. It's just an arbitrary rule. Where morality comes in is when you have suffering. For example, if you create those artificial beings in a game capable of suffering, and if they die permanently, and you start going around harming them and destroying their communities and making them suffer, then you are evil, even if it's just a simulation, because you're actually causing real suffering. And
that's going to happen in the future. We're going to have suits on, and if you kill someone or shoot someone, he's going to experience pain, and people are going to love playing this game.
That's true, but it's very limited. It's something that we accept in that. It's not something that you're not really dying, and you're not really suffering. It's just a little ow, you know.
Yeah. But if we're in a simulation, then we're also not really dying. Like God to God, no one is dead. Like if you kill a person, he still has a soul. It just goes. Understand? God can spawn the guy again if he wants. He can put it into another body, and it's not like the person is forever dead.
Well, I dispute the existence of any soul in the first place. But and after all, how many other bodies have you been in? Do you recall? I'm not talking about
girlfriends. I don't know.
I'm talking about, has your soul been in other bodies before? You don't
No,
have any
but
memory
I
of
think
that,
there
so
is
that's
actually
irrelevant.
evidence for a soul. I've seen scientific tests being done on. I'll send it perhaps in the.
Are you talking about the
in the
body
comments.
weighing a little less after it dies? That's
No, no,
what-
no, no, no. That's bad evidence.
Yeah, it is.
That's bad evidence. No, scientists actually. There's people that say they can go out of their body. So they say, "Come, do it. Let us test you." And then they put a card on the above the bed, like far away, and they attach this guy to a computer, so he can't get away. And they measure his brain waves, and then he has to say what's on that card. And they succeeded in saying what's on the card, and then another scientist didn't believe this. He also tested and he found the same results.
I would
And
like
even
to see that,
Aaron
because
Ra-
that I
Aaron
don't
Ra
believe.
said-
I'd have to actually see some evidence for that.
Yeah, I'll send you that. And even Aaron Ra, you know Aaron Ra?
Yeah, I know.
He said he also did a test like that. A girl told him she can do it, and he said, "Sure, come do it." And he went to his friend's home, and he did crazy stuff, and she could tell him everything that happened. Yeah, I'll send you a video where he actually says that.
Now you have to understand that there's such thing as scientifically rigorous testing, and there's such thing as
Yes,
anecdotal.
we have to do it multiple times.
Yes, and not just, and they have to be scientifically rigorous in the sense that,
But-
I mean, I've seen people make cards
Yeah.
disappear in seemingly
Yeah, sure.
in midair, but it's just trickery, and you have to be able
Yeah,
to.
but if it's true,
remove that.
then it could be evidence for a soul. Wouldn't you agree? If it's found to be true, then it could be evidence for a soul, because the guy actually.
Yeah, if you can
saw
demonstrate that a person's consciousness can be separated from the body and find out information that the body is nowhere near,
Yeah.
that would be
stuff,
I would consider
good
that some
evidence for a
evidence.
soul.
Yeah, well, something. I don't know if you're going to call it a soul, but spirit or life force or something like that. Sure.
Okay, so the theory of a creator, I think we can make more predictions. We can predict that there would be an explosion of life in the past, which is a characteristic of
No.
intelligence.
Why would we expect that?
We can find that.
That's not what
Because
the.
explosion of life is a characteristic of intelligence, not of evolution.
What,
and
where
so-
in the world do you get that? How is that?
It's because it's a characteristic of intelligence. Evolution can't make an explosion of life or easily.
Why-
It's
what-
not a
what do you-
characteristic of evolution.
Name one example where intelligence creates an explosion of life.
Well, like in a computer program, suddenly there's all the stuff is generated. Most of the work is done.
Those aren't
and,
life. Those are just.
Yeah, but if we could make life and we
Yeah.
could make an explosion of life, it's a characteristic of intelligence.
Saying if we could do
So the
that,
chemical
then it would be a
explosion could be
characteristic of
evidence of-
intelligence.
Huh?
You're saying that if we could create life and we could create it as an explosion, then it would be evidence that that intelligence could create
no.
an explosion?
Yeah. See, if we see an explosion in life, like a fast creation of life, then it's a characteristic of intelligence, not of evolution. Evolution takes a long time. Understand? It's not a characteristic of evolution.
Yeah, but where do we see an explosion of life?
It can be an explosion.
That wasn't that took over 20 million years. That is not an
In
explosion.
evolutionary sense, that is like a blink of an eye.
Yeah,
So
it's
that's why
quick,
they call it
but
a
it's not a
Cambrian
blink of an eye. That's 20 million years is a long time, and it's certainly not in any way compatible with the idea of the biblical creation, where everything was created in a week. Actually, fewer
All I'm
days than
saying
that.
is, all I'm saying it could be evidence for a creator. That's all I'm saying. Explosion of life could be evidence for a creator. We could have the dating wrong, and it's not 20 million years. We don't know.
Well,
We're
you
not
can say,
100%
yeah,
sure.
okay, all the dating could be wrong, all the previous evidence
No,
for life
it's
could
the-
be wrong, and if it's
No,
all wrong, then
but I'm
maybe
saying it could be evidence for intelligence. That's all I'm saying.
I don't agree. That's not evidence for it. All that is it would be.
So if we find an explosion of life, it's not an evidence. It could not be evidence for intelligence.
Not even slightly, because there is no evidence.
Really?
There is no evidence that intelligence creates an explosion of life. We've never seen
That's a
that.
characteristic of intelligence.
No, it
If
isn't.
we saw
Where's
life
an
just popping into
example?
existence, then it's a characteristic of intelligence. You understand?
Where is an
Suddenly
example
there's
of it?
explosion.
give me one example where an explosion of life is an indicator of intelligence.
Like I said, in a computer program, suddenly everything is just generated. The same with if there's a creator, he could just fast track evolution.
But you're making a false dichotomy between a computer program and life. Life doesn't duplicate like that.
Life works with a program.
Yeah, but it doesn't. It's a type of code, not in the human sense, but it is a type of code which has its own rules for duplication, and its duplications are. It's much slower than on a computer. A computer works very differently. You can copy a file in multiple times extremely quickly, but life doesn't do that.
DNA also. I'll show you where they explain how fast DNA copies itself.
But we aren't talking about DNA. We're talking about life.
Yeah, life consists of DNA.
Yeah, DNA preceded life.
Yes,
almost certainly.
Well, you can't
it
get
depends.
life without
RNA
DNA.
first, but regardless, you don't have DNA suddenly propagating a gazillion times and making a gazillion life forms. I don't even know what you're trying to describe there. That's not a characteristic of intelligence. It's a
explosion of life is, I think, could be a characteristic of intelligence, because evolution takes a long time. Explosion would suddenly be, could be, like, say suddenly we see a lot of life on Earth. It could be that the alien put life suddenly and jump-started it on Earth. You understand? It's a sudden explosion of life. So
but if you dated that, if aliens came by 4 billion years, let's go with 500 million years ago, and seeded the Earth completely, boom, as is, and let it go from there, we would see absolutely no evidence of life up to that point, and then suddenly every form of life would be visible. We don't see that at all with the Cambrian explosion. Before that, we have what, a billion years of single cell life in the form which is evidenced by things like stromatolites, simple single cell critters, essentially algal mats and the like, and then they get more complex. We start seeing evidence of boreholes from worms, but we don't see the actual preserved worms because they don't have any hard parts. And then suddenly we start seeing a wide variety of species all developing over the course of 20 million years. And, crucially, none of those species resemble anything that's alive today. None of them are the same ones. They've all gone extinct, or rather evolved into different species since then. If you look at the examples of the Cambrian species from the Cambrian explosion, that wide variety of body types and the like, they resemble nothing like what we see today. And that's because of that would be evidence against the whole idea that a creator created them, because if a creator created life as it exists today, essentially, then we would see the same species back then. We wouldn't see them be completely different, right? I mean, I'm assuming you're accepting
it would be different, because if you copy code, errors automatically get into the code. So it would automatically be different, especially if it's a lot of time. If you copy any code, then errors get into that code. Even in computers, there's...
So basically you're saying that evolution is true even after the Cambrian explosion.
No, but even in DNA, there's errors that get through. Even after the DNA double checks, it has a machine that double checks the DNA. And even after that, there can still be errors that get through because of sources like radiation and stuff like that.
Yeah. So, I'm not sure what your point is there.
No, I'm just saying that life wouldn't stay the same because there would be changes through errors.
Yeah,
so
but I'm assuming you're using the biblical creation, right? So we're talking about there's going to be the lions, the tigers, the whales,
No,
etc.
no, that's a like assumption made.
But you have said
I
you're
don't-
Christian, so that's
Yeah,
why
I'm Christian,
making it.
but there's not just one theory in Christianity. There's
It's over
multiple
40,000,
theories
yeah,
battling
I know.
themselves. No, it's like the Creator is super complex, so you would expect multiple theories to understand it. We are like ants trying to understand the internet, you understand? So there would be multiple theories to trying to understand a Creator that's like far above our, and you understand? Far above us.
Yeah, well, but what it sounds like, what you're saying is that basically from the Cambrian forward, evolutionary theory is accurate. And is that what you're essentially saying?
I'm saying microevolution is true, and I'm saying if you say macroevolution is just multiple microevolution, then
Yeah.
I would agree with macroevolution. But there's some stuff in evolution that's just a little bit dodgy, like like how they. I'll show you what's really dodgy to me.
Okay, I'd like to see that. But if I'm getting you right here, you're understanding that everything looked very different in the Cambrian explosion, through the Cambrian explosion, and that due to DNA errors and I would presume you accept natural selection in that case, that would improve the chances of surviving in some cases and reduce chances of surviving in others, that the species would change over time until today, when you end up with a very different set of life forms that have nothing in common, almost nothing in common with those.
But what's funny is some of the life forms stay the same the whole time. Like
What?
the coelacanth fish stays the same for millions of years. The crocodile stays the same for millions of years.
Yeah, but if you go to the Cambrian, none of those were around. You should see, look at some pictures of the life that was in the Cambrian. It does not resemble anything that we have today. Our closest ancestor of all vertebrates was this little. It looks like a butter knife type creature. It doesn't have a full spine like any vertebrates that we have today, and none of the other creatures do as well. So we're talking about some major genetic change over the millions of years to result in today's species.
But scientists also found recently that the first trees were more complex than their successors, and
there's
they found
there's
the
nothing
first
wrong
trees.
with something losing capabilities over time. In fact, that's often happens with specialization.
Yes.
You've seen blind cavefish. They still have eyes, but they lost their ability to see.
Yes, but I'm saying the first trees we ever see is far more complex, which could be evidence for intelligence. The very first trees they found were more complex than ours.
I
can send you a link that explains how the very first trees they found were really complex.
Okay, that'd be fun to see as well. I don't buy that though, because we have simpler forms of plants in general, going back before trees, well before trees.
It just could be evidence for intelligence. But anyway, here's a historian of science that said the following: the idea of God that creating the universe is a more respectable hypothesis today than at any time in the last 100 years. Would you agree with that? Or
I would say that that's entirely false. It was before we had any understanding of the natural, much understanding of the natural world.
In the last 100 years, not the 1,000 years.
No, but
I'm saying the last 100 years.
I would say that there's even less chance, because we've all the naturalistic explanations we've had prior to 100 years ago, which would include evolution and which would include some cosmology, has within the past 100 years become more solidified. We now understand a lot more about our universe, and none of it requires any supernatural or creator-type presence to explain.
Yes, because you can explain it away.
It's not explaining it away. You have to...
Like fine tuning, you can explain it away and say it's a multiverse, or understand. You can always explain away evidence.
Well, even the whole concept of fine-tuning makes little sense when you consider the hundreds of billions of galaxies, each with hundreds of billions of stars, each with multiple planets around them, and all the life that we know of that exists in the entire universe. There may be more, but the only life that we know of exists on this thin skin of this one planet where the vast majority of the planet we can't live on. We'll die within moments. Either it's way too cold, way too hot, or it's water and you drown, 70% of it being ocean. And the kinds of foods that we can eat are extremely are limited. You have to. You can't just eat anything and expect to survive. And you've got predators that are out after you. There's diseases. This is not a planet or a universe that is conducive to life. It's 99.99999+% instantly lethal to life. So.
But so what?
So what the point is, it's not fine-tuned for life. If you wanted a fine-tuned for life universe, then life would be everywhere.
Fine-tuned just to exist. There has to be a fine-tuning just to exist, like the gravitational constant has to be fine-tuned.
Not necessarily, because that's to result in the universe exactly as it is. You can change several constants, and you would get the same result. If you change one, that would mess it up, but you can change multiple ones and still get the same results, in theory. And it's possible even you can get rid of an entire force. The weak force may be one that can be removed. So it's not like
But if you say that, why do atheists then run to the excuse of a multiverse if it's so easily to explain the fine-tuning? It's not really fine-tuned.
That's because that's one of many problems that the fine-tune argument has. The other one is that quantum mechanics predicts the existence of multiple. Every decision that can be made, there'd be a different universe that propagates from that. It completely splits. There's the possibility for an infinite number of universes. The same thing with string theory. There's a possibility of infinite number of universes. And these aren't just made up things. These are the actual consequences of the math. They predict these existences. So by using that math, you can say, well, if this theory predicts that there's going to be that there should be an infinite number of universes, then comes the idea of the multiverse. It's not like, oh boy, we've got a problem with the Earth being so.
So there's evidence actually for multiverse, because I haven't seen any evidence.
There's
for
mathematical
multiverse.
Evidence for it. Well, it's mathematical. It's
Okay.
not. It's
Okay,
not
show me that.
physical.
You can show me that evidence. You can send it to me, because I've never seen any evidence for multiverse.
Okay, but I would say, and it's something you can easily check up yourself. One is string theory, and the other is.
Yeah, I know about string theory.
Yeah, well.
But I haven't seen multiple universes. Perhaps multiple dimensions in the same universe. That I could see.
Well,
Do you agree with
it does
multiple
it does
dimensions?
it does assume multiple dimensions, yes, but that's not what it's referring to. Some of those dimensions are extremely tiny. It's the consequences of string theory that implies multiple universes.
So no amount of fine-tuning would be evidence for a creator. No amount of fine-tuning we find in this universe would be evidence for a creator.
Well,
According to you. No amount.
It would be weak evidence for it, perhaps, but it certainly wouldn't be significant evidence for it. No.
Okay, so you would agree then it could be evidence for a creator, but you just say it's weak.
Well, no, I'm not saying it's. I'm not
You
saying
just said it's weak evidence.
it's weak because you're making certain assumptions.
I'm
Like,
just saying
well,
it's evidence.
see, one of the problems is that
Yeah.
you're assuming that we would be able to determine this with one data set. We are in one universe. We don't know what the odds are of the particular constants turning out exactly how they are, as they have. Are they completely randomized? We don't know. Are they very narrowly, is there only a very narrow option of range of options for what a constant can actually be? We don't know. So with one data set, you can't make claims about the universe being fine-tuned. It's, as for all we know, it's 100% chance that it had to turn out this way through purely naturalistic means. You can't make a claim about a single data set. It's a meaningless claim to
Okay, so
make
you say
statistics
it's
about that.
impossible to figure out if we have a fine-tuned universe. You say it's
Impossible ever? I don't know.
because-
I mean, we may have some time in the future may find some way to determine if there are multiple universes, but we don't know of any way to do it now. Certainly technologically and scientifically we can't do it now.
Because scientists said they find a lot of fine-tuning, but so you won't agree that it's fine-tuned. Because I don't know how they figure it out, but they said there's a lot of constants that are fine-tuned.
Yes,
to
what they're saying
insane
is
the group.
they are saying yes. There's a
So they're
couple
wrong.
of
Those scientists are wrong.
no. They're saying that it's the term fine-tuning that's the problem here, because you're assuming someone tuned it. What they mean by that is that there is only a very fine range, a small range that the constants can be to develop into stars and result in. If you
So, but you just said there's multiple universes, so
No, I
couldn't
didn't.
those universes have different?
I said that there's mathematical evidence that perhaps
Yes.
they exist. That's the best I'm going to say. I'm not going to say that there are multiple universes. Anyone who says
Okay.
that there is a multiverse is not saying something that can be verified.
Okay, but so a fine-tuning, you would agree that if the scientists can find a lot of fine-tuning, that could be evidence for intelligence, because
Maybe,
because fine-tuning
but
usually
you can't.
has intelligence.
The problem is that you're using the term fine-tuning and thinking, oh, there's got to be a
natural
tuner.
processes can also fine-tune.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
Yeah,
That-
okay.
So that's where I'm using fine-tuning.
Well,
You say fine-tuning was done by a natural process. I say perhaps it could be intelligence.
because it could be either, it's not evidence for either. What you're talking about is until we somehow manage
could
to
be
find out
evidence for both.
whether there is a range that each of the constants can fall under. If we could find some way to do that, and it turns out that our universe is just so perfectly lined up, that would imply one of two things. Yes, perhaps someone created it to be just perfect like that, or it's one of a gazillion options that exist out there, and we are in the one that happens to, or in one of them that happens to have those constants that are needed to form our universe as we know it.
So would you agree that fine-tuning could be evidence? Because it could be evidence for both. Theories can have evidence can be used for both cases. You understand? Like even
Well,
in a court case, you
then
can
it's
use the
pointless
same
in this
evidence
case.
for both cases, but it doesn't remove the fact that it's still evidence. So it could
Well-
be evidence for intelligence. Like if we find enough fine-tuning, like super a lot of fine-tuning, and it would become so hard for to explain this naturalistic, then it could be evidence for intelligence.
You keep
Because
ignoring the
intelligence
fact
can
that
easily fine-tune stuff.
But you keep ignoring the fact that we can't know if this is finely tuned or if this is the inevitable consequence.
But you can say
The
the
chances
same
that this
of, like-
universe coming out exactly as it has could range anywhere from 1 in a gazillion to 100%. It's anywhere
the same,
in that
you say
range.
we can't know. It's the same as saying we can't know if this cup is on the table. We can't know it.
Yeah.
And then just that's not a way to explain away the evidence. Like
Right, we have to work with what we have, and what we have as the universe is one data set, and one data set without any information to verify, to know whether that is a requirement of how universes are created, or whether it's extremely unlikely set of circumstances. There's no way to know with one data set. It's like being told that there's a cup that is that exists.
But there's no way to know if this cup also exists. So it's
Yeah,
the same
because-
as saying there's no way to know if it exists. But
We work with what
it's
we
not a
have.
good enough excuse. But
We work with what we have. We have a cup that we can actually work with. We have one universe that we can work with. This cup may be virtual. We don't know because it seems real to us. We have to work with this universe because that's what we have. And to say that the universe is finely tuned or that this cup is virtual is that's going into the realm of speculation only.
Okay, anyway, scientists have also relatively recently found an engine on a bacteria that you know about that functions just like an electric engine. It has many of the same parts and it has to be constructed from the inside out and in the right order. And there's code that gives command for when each part should be added. Scientists call this the most efficient engine in the universe, and it's also called the bacterial flagella motor. And so this rotor alone can operate like at 1,000 RPM. It has 2 gears, forward and reverse. It's water cooled. It has a rotor. It has a stator. It has a U-joint. And it has so many parts that are just the same like our engines. So I want to know, explain to me how this most efficient engine in the universe evolved by Darwinian means. Like, explain to me how this
very simple actually. There's a couple options. First off, this is the argument that Michael Behe used during this. That's one of
you used the irreducible complexity argument. This is not the irreducible complexity. I'm just saying this is like an insane.
Well, he was saying that the bacterial flagella is irreducibly complex, and because it is so irreducibly complex, it's evidence for a creator. That's essentially his argument. And
but that's not my
his argument didn't work. Well, you're just saying that it's complex, right? How could that possibly evolve?
I'm just saying, how did this thing evolve?
Well,
it's so much like our technology. How did it evolve by Darwinian means? Like,
well,
I want to know how it evolved. Like,
we don't know exactly how it evolved, but we know there are two options. One is we know pre-adaptation is an option. There is a syringe injecting poison, a poison-injecting syringe through some bacteria. You know about that?
Yes.
Okay.
But
it's almost identical to the.
No, it's not almost identical.
It is. It's almost identical to the flagella. It has the same basic structure, but it's only missing most of the parts. But the point is that you've got something that's being used for something completely different, and that evolves on its own with its own selective pressures. But then it turns out to have uses for another purpose. Perhaps a mutation occurs, and the syringe part actually can rotate, and then suddenly you have a secondary purpose that bacteria can take advantage of, and natural selection can select for. In addition to that, we have other simpler steps that can occur in the simple development of a cell occurs in a cell wall. There's a great little video. It's an old one, but it's a great little video by
you should send
007. I can find that.
Because I've heard that scientists rather think that the one with the less parts came from the one with more parts because it's much easier to lose parts than gain them. And wouldn't you agree that it's much easier to lose parts than gain them?
No.
Like lose abilities?
Not at all. One sec.
You won't agree that it's much easier to lose parts than gain them?
No. See, you can actually gain parts. An example is chromosomal doubling. This often occurs where the entire genome will double. The entire chromosome structure will double, and that's just a single mutation that can cause that to occur. And if you have that occur, then each of those, you're essentially doubling your genetic material to work with, and any of those can mutate, and you end up with the ability to add additional features or lose them.
So scientists are wrong that say it's much easier to lose parts than gain them in evolution. Scientists are wrong that say it's much easier to lose parts than gain.
No, I'm not saying that's wrong at all. It depends what the context is that they're talking about, because if you're talking about actual physical limbs and the like, yeah, it's easier to lose them than to gain them. But if you're talking about at the genetic level, it's just as easy to double your genome.
Okay, so so you won't see this as it could possibly be evidence for creator. Say we find irreducible complexity.
Yes.
Like irreducible complexity, would that be evidence for a creator, or is that also not evidence for a creator?
It could be. It could be, but the problem
evolution.
is that no one has ever found any
So we just have
examples
to
of
find
irreducible
that.
complexity.
Then it would be game over for evolution, or what?
Well, the problem is, though, is how do you know it's irreducibly complex? There's, if just because you might not have an explanation. For example, the bacterial flagellum is a good example. When they first posited this, is saying, look how complex it is. There's no way that it could have evolved. If you take away any of these parts, the entire system will cease to function. Therefore, it's impossible that the flagellum evolved on its own, and this is irreducibly complex. And then it was found that there are other optional ways, by pre-adaptation mainly, that
it's the co-option argument. You call it the co-option argument.
Sure.
Where,
but the point is that before there was a time when that sounded like, oh, that's a good argument, but then the solution was found. So how do you know if something is irreducibly complex, or whether we just haven't described it yet?
In scientific debates, that there was a Christian that made the best arguments against irreducible complexity. A Christian made the best arguments against irreducible complexity, and in scientific debates he gets his butt kicked when he uses the same argument. In a court, it was easy to pass it by, but in scientific debates he gets his butt kicked if he uses the same argument.
I don't know what you're referring to, but in court cases...
I'll show you.
Okay, but in court cases, as I said, the standard of proof is much lower than in the scientific arena, at least for...
Yeah.
You've got to support your claims much better in scientific.
So it's bad to use the Dover trial as a as a good example. Because he just said it's less.
The Dover Kitzmiller.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is not evidence for evolution or against creationism. What that did was highlight the problems of the intelligent design claim, because this was an opportunity for them to present their best evidence. In a court.
Why not in a scientific debate?
Because they'd already lost the scientific debate. This was about, yes, they had. They already lost that because they were not able to produce any evidence to support it. What that court case was about was whether ID could be taught in schools. There were a number of inane problems that came out of that. One of them was the book that they used that they wanted to use as a textbook, called On Pandas and People, I believe. It was exactly the same book as a creationism book, but they just replaced all the references of creationism to intelligent design and intelligent design proponents instead of creationists, and throughout the book. It's the exact same book. So that was to prove that it was creationism that they were teaching. If they're using the exact same book and just changing one of the words, it's just a rebranding of creationism. And creationism had already been determined not to be scientific. It doesn't make any testable claims.
It makes predictions. It makes, like I showed you a few predictions that it makes, that when scientists said the universe is eternal, it makes a prediction that it's not eternal, because there has to, if a creator exists, it can't
but
be
as
eternal.
I pointed out, even if the universe were steady state, it would have no impact on that claim that the universe was created, because a theist would simply say the universe was created as is.
So
they already do that. They
So
already do that now
use that.
for saying that the age of the universe is only 6,000 years. They're saying, well, we've got stars that are are billions of light years away, and we're only now seeing light. So what do they say? Oh, well, God created the universe with the light already in transit. So those stars were not created billions of years ago. They were created 6,000 years ago with the light already on its way here, and it's just now hitting us. So you can always wiggle out of those with
I know. You can
religious
always make
explanation.
excuses for stuff. I know.
But this is a steady state universe definitely would not have any negative impact on that claim of
Okay,
success.
so atheists that used that argument was a stupid argument in the past. They all used that argument that it's eternal, you don't need a creator.
They didn't all use
They-
that argument.
In the past they did.
Some did.
That was one of
Yeah, there's some that may have
in the
used that
debates,
argument,
always
but
they said that.
that's not that
So
is
it's a bad argument.
the steady state. Yeah, I would say it's not the problem is when you're using when you can always turn to magic as your explanation,
Oh.
then anything can be explained.
Well, other aliens, advanced aliens, technology would look like magic. So
Yeah,
what
that's
do you-
why we
what do you-
don't use that as an explanation for anything. Although that would be something that at least could be on the natural side. It wouldn't require any resorting to the supernatural.
Yeah, have you heard of quantum entanglement?
Yes.
Could that be evidence for a simulation? Because that's flippin' freaky. It's really freaky.
It's freaky stuff, but that's not evidence for a simulation. I mean, if you're on a motorcycle and you want to turn right, which way do you turn the handlebars?
No, but
I mean,
see,
what I'm
quantum
saying there
entanglement
is the answer to that
is-
is you turn left, and that will turn the motorcycle to the right. It seems counterintuitive. It doesn't make any sense at all. You could say that weirdness is evidence for that we live in a simulation. That's something that must be a
Yeah,
glitch
but-
in the Matrix or something. But no, it's just that we initially didn't understand the physics. Now we understand the physics for that. Same thing with quantum entanglement. It's freaky stuff, but it doesn't mean that freaky stuff is evidence of.
No. I'm just saying because
Simulation.
you can move information faster than the speed of light, and that should be like impossible almost because there's already like a speed limit in our universe.
Yeah, but
which
it's
could
not-
also be evidence for
Yeah.
simulation because the speed limit. How can there be a speed limit?
Well,
in the universe.
it's not like the information is traveling. The information, the two things are connected so that they're.
Teleporting or something.
It's weird stuff, yes, but it's not actual travel of information. It's they're connected, and what one does, the other does. So there is some weird connection there. It's just not. It's not
And the
travel.
speed limit of the universe, could that be perhaps also pointing to perhaps a simulation because and that speed time is relative to speed, like almost like that computer is lagging or something.
Well, that would be.
for-
I mean, when you reach for things like that, that's like saying, well, time is relative, therefore morality is relative. That it's.
I didn't say that.
It doesn't really relate. No, I know you didn't. I was just trying to say that as an example of just because something seems that there's an oddity, something that seems odd to us in physics, that's evidence for a simulation? No, that isn't even a prediction that a
No, I'm saying
simulation would have.
it could perhaps point. Say we find out it was a simulation, then we
Yeah.
could have said, oh, we should have realized that the speed limit in
Yeah.
the universe was perhaps also pointing towards that it was a simulation.
Well,
Understand?
yeah, if we
And,
actually had some evidence that that's how, if you create a simulation, that the natural consequence of that is going to be a speed limit, then yeah, that would make sense. But we don't have any evidence for that.
Yeah, I'm just saying it could be evidence. Like, say we find out in the future that it was actually a simulation, then we can look back and see that was actually evidence for simulation because it could have been evidence because there was a speed limit which you would find in a simulation, not in some natural world or universe.
Maybe. Who knows? We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But
So
actually,
should you?
I'm going to suggest that we cut this off now. We are
Okay.
at over the 2-hour mark. And
Okay, cool.
yeah, as I told you, it's going to take me a long time to upload this whole thing. I don't really want to cut any part of it out.
Okay.
So we'll see if I can find a faster way to upload it. I don't know. We'll see. But anyway, I want to stop
It
the
was
thing.
so
I want to save
interesting.
it.
I still wanted to.
There's more to say, but we can save that for some other time.
Me and you can wait like for hours and hours because it's just so interesting.
Yes, it is. It is. It's interesting stuff. I agree.
And fun.
Okay.
Yeah, anyway.
But anyway, thank you. I appreciate it.
Pleasure.
And I do think that your argument, I will say this, I think that your argument for comparing DNA code to computer code is probably one of the strongest arguments for a creator. It's still entirely inadequate, I believe, especially since we can compare it with the electricity and lightning analogy. But
you should put this in the YouTube video. Huh? You should put.
Oh yeah, no, I'm saying
Don't
this
cut
is,
it out.
it's the best argument, and even the best argument you've got is inadequate.
No.
Is what I'm saying. So
I know everything is inadequate. It doesn't matter if the root, everyone sees God. It doesn't matter if we find demons. You would say it's not evidence for God. I know that anything
no,
is
that's not
inadequate.
true. No, if I see sufficient evidence, that's, and as I've pointed out, examples of what that would be, that would cause me to change my mind. But you're going to need extraordinary evidence. That's the thing. Anyway, thanks for calling in, and we'll talk later.
Cheers, man.
Okay, bye-bye.